Welcome to the Quiet Hours. You are listening to Slow Night, Ancient Tales. Tonight we journey back to the year 1927, exploring a poignant piece by Korean author Lee Hyo-seok titled When Hungry, A Fragment of Life. It is a raw and honest portrait of a man pushed to his limits. As dusk falls and the scent of warm dinners fills the alleyways, our protagonist finds himself cast out, battling overwhelming hunger and the cold indifference of the city. As we follow his unsteady steps through the flickering streetlights, let us witness his desperate struggle and the unexpected, fragile courage he finds at the very end. Whatever heavy thoughts you carried today, let them drift away with the shadows of this old city. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the tale begin. A Fragment of Life. Source: Youth, March 1927. It is evening in the back alley. From the servants' kitchens, the sound of chopping wood rings loudly, and evening smoke hangs thick around every house. Water pours generously from the water taps. The shouting voices of street vendors seem to tear through the back alley, and people haggle over groceries at the shops as if picking a fight, as if trying to settle the final accounts of the day's life. The people seem to be screaming their lungs out one last time. That insolent bastard! Staggering with unsteady steps as he emerged from the bustling back alley, he muttered once again. His face was still burning with fury, his heart pounded loudly, and his fists trembled. No matter how uneducated a bastard he is, calling me a beggar? Ah, you thief-like scumbag! However, the more he thought about it, the more he shivered with rage and boundless resentment over the humiliation he had suffered from that guy. Thinking about how he couldn't just knock the guy down with a single punch made his stomach churn, and at the same time, he felt like digging a hole in the ground to hide in. All the bastards in the world who call themselves landlords, no, all those with money, are exactly like that. He forced a conclusion to himself like this to try and suppress his anger, but there was no way his heart, overflowing with pent-up rage, would calm down so easily. Come to think of it, such humiliation was not limited to today alone. It was a daily occurrence. Whenever the landlord sensed he was in his room, he would sneak up and slide the door open slightly. And whether he was told to come in or not, he stepped right into the room without a moment's hesitation. Skipping greetings and all that nonsense, he would bluntly say, "How about that?" and start urging him again. Rent, of course. A few months ago, having resigned from his company, which sounds nice enough, but to put it bluntly, he was kicked out. He ended up idling away for several months. Suddenly finding another means of living was not an easy task. No matter how disadvantaged he was, as a subordinate, if he had just patiently endured the things that offended him, nothing would have happened. But because he inherently had a hot temper, he couldn't just swallow and tolerate the condescending and sickening attitudes of those so-called section chiefs and the like. One day, while arguing with an incredibly disgusting and nagging section chief, if he had just feigned ignorance and held back when his friends nearby tried to stop him, nothing would have happened. But, feeling offended, he eventually ended up raising his hand against him. It was natural that the outcome would be disadvantageous for him. He was immediately fired and kicked out. And ever since then, for 4 straight months, he couldn't find a job and was only hounded day and night in the corner of his rented room. He had been putting it off, saying tomorrow or the day after, but there was no reason for money to appear so easily. However, even though the landlord guessed his situation, he relentlessly pressed him every single day. Today as well, having starved for a few days, needless to say, he had starved for 3 whole days straight. He was lying in the corner of his room without an ounce of strength since the morning, and without forgetting, the landlord came in again. But today, the approach was different from the start. Usually, at least in the beginning, the landlord would try smiling, softening him up, coaxing him, tickling his ego, and making all sorts of whining sounds. But today, he came out cursing right off the bat. Now that I look at it, haven't I been keeping a wicked beggar? Day and night, it's tomorrow or the day after. What a guy with some nerve. How many months has it been, you punk? If you have any shame, think about it. He spouted all kinds of insults. But even setting that aside, later on, "You punk, get out right now. I don't need to keep the likes of you." Saying this, he carelessly laid his hands on the tenant's belongings, scattering desks, wicker trunks, and everything else all over the place. However, so dumbfounded and astounded was he that he merely stared blankly at this rude and offensive behavior as if it were someone else's affair, unable to say a single word in defiance. It wasn't that he lacked the guts, but his stomach was completely empty and he didn't have an ounce of strength. He had pawned even his last remaining pair of suit trousers to scrape by for meals, but even that money had run out before he knew it. Anyway, the last time he tasted food was 3 days ago. His intestines were shriveled, his blood felt completely dried up, and he didn't have the energy or spirit to even stand up. The landlord gathered the scattered luggage, tied it up tightly, shoved it into a corner, and said, "Leave your bags here and get out, you punk," making gestures as if chasing away a dog or a pig. No matter how devoid of strength he could not bear it any longer. He summoned all the strength in his body and jumped to his feet. Based on his anger, it wouldn't have been satisfying enough, even if he had knocked the guy down right then and there. But since his stomach was so empty and he lacked any vigor, "Ugh, you're worse than a pig." He left just that single word, spitting it out, and staggered outside. Even when he had completely left the back alley and stepped onto the main street with weak steps, his anger had not yet dissipated. "Worse than a pig," he fired off repeatedly, spitting phlegm at the pockmarked phantom of the landlord flickering before his eyes. However, without needing to say more, simply put, having been kicked out of the landlord's house, his future was pitch black as to where he should go. He had a few friends he knew, but it felt awkward to suddenly visit them at an ungodly hour and cause an inconvenience. But right now, more than anything else, he was starving to death. His consciousness was fading in and out, his weak waist slumped heavily, and taking each step was infinitely agonizing. On top of that hunger, he was so thirsty that his insides burned as if he were chewing hot sand. He turned back the way he came, entered the back alley again, and went to where the water tap was. He put his mouth to the pouring water tap and gulped down a few mouthfuls of cold water. From the houses, the sound of washing dishes and clinking bowls already flowed out, and the savory smell of stew tempted him infinitely. He stepped out onto the main street again. The city, which had been stepped on, squeezed, dragged, screaming, and harassed all day, was spread out quite cluttered and chaotic. The hurrying steps of the people, the public market that looked as if a feast had broken out, the people seemed to be screaming their final screams just to live. He suddenly looked up at the sky. The wide, high, and eternal sky was like eternity itself. The small city spread out beneath it, the even smaller people bustling within it, and the thing called life unfolding among them looked infinitely tiny. The sky looked down majestically, as if acknowledging everything happening in this human world. He walked past the large brick building to the side of the public market. Right on the spot next to the mailbox, where a few days ago a beggar child had dropped dead and people couldn't even approach, today a straw mat was rolled out, a fruit stand was set up on it, and people were forming a wall in front of it, haggling over fruits. Just thinking about it made him sick and tired, and his head throbbed fiercely. "No, what am I thinking about now?" he suddenly snapped back to himself. Right. More than that. Starving to death right now, he needed something, anything to eat. At the restaurants, all kinds of food beckoned to him, and in front of the fruit stand, Mounty, NS of fruit, seemed to call his name. Every nerve in his body converged there, and his entire senses were focused on the fruits themselves. He felt that if he could just rush in, shove his face into them, and chew on the refreshing fruits to his heart's content, the moment they entered his stomach, they would turn into fresh blood, circulating through his body again, reviving him and making his whole body leap with energy. The thought of not being able to eat these things, even when they were piled up right in front of his eyes, was maddening. This damned world that starves a person to death even with such abundant food around. He shouted loudly, but he only thought so in his mind. He didn't even have the strength to cry it out. He tried to tightly fasten his belt, which had somehow loosened again. Then, as if suddenly struck by a good idea, his eyes flashed as he looked over his own body. and he smiled as if he had made a new discovery. If he just pawned his hat and overcoat, he could live comfortably not just for a meal, but for a whole day. He thought he had to escape immediate death, even if he ended up not just bare-chested, but completely stark naked later. At this accidental discovery, acting as if he was saved now, he forced strength into his heavy steps that were hard to lift and hurriedly headed toward the pawn shop he usually frequented. However, the door was already firmly shut. As if there was no more business to be done, it arrogantly rejected customers with a satiated air. He only then realized that it was past closing time. Now, everything was despair. The world went dark before his eyes as to what he should do. The streets grew quite dark, and the electric lights blinked and gradually became brighter. The people with grease shining on their lips all looked happy. Happiness was taking down a bowl of rice and hot soup. But he was half dying of hunger. As he turned the corner at the intersection, he suddenly found himself sucking on his own fist. Crushed by hunger and fatigue, his legs had no strength at all. His whole body felt as limp as sawdust, and his steps wobbled like a clumsy clown. His mind was hazy like a mirage, and the city looked all distorted to his eyes. The world was turned upside down. People were walking on their heads, and every streetcar was a triangle. The electric lights looked jagged. The brick houses were expressionist architecture, the cargo trucks were fully loaded with cooked rice, and bright red apples hung from the street trees. But when these illusions vanished, he cried out loudly, "Ah, what am I supposed to do?" He thought about dying, and so he pictured methods of suicide one by one in his head. But the next moment he thought, just because I die, it's not like the world will suddenly become better, nor will many people enjoy happiness. It simply means I will be the only one dead, and gave up on dying. More than death, he was at the point where he couldn't stand the hunger right now. At the top of the large brick building, an advertisement for digestive medicine shone brilliantly. A digestive medicine for full-bellied bastards when there are people dying of hunger. Before such ordinary reasoning could even fully form in his head, he just cursed this damned city and clenched his fist, and an illusion of the whole city collapsing into ruins all at once flickered before his eyes. He felt an indescribable pleasure, but the moment the happy illusion shattered, his hunger surged back up again. Tears welled up fully in his twitching eyes. How pathetic. He whipped his heart that was on the verge of crying and shook off his tears with self-deprecation. And as he sharply turned the street he was walking on, shining people came out laughing. Behind them, a delicious smell wafted out intensely. It suggested something to him. His feet turned almost reflexively toward the front of that restaurant. As if he had now found a place to survive, he SSLE opened the restaurant door and threw his body, which looked like it was about to collapse at any moment, inside the restaurant. Having filled his stomach solidly, his clear consciousness was finally restored, and the pale sprout of straight, coherent thoughts began to move in his head. In truth, he devoured the food as if trying to make up all at once for the days he had starved completely. It was fortunate that there were no other customers, because if anyone had seen how he devoured it, they would not have considered him human. He ate so greedily, almost as if he wanted to show truly full people what hunger really was. The number of bowls completely covering the table would prove just how much he had eaten. He himself was newly surprised when he now looked at the table. At the same time, when he realized what that meant, he suddenly felt terror. He subconsciously put his hand in his pocket. However, the completely empty pocket seemed to mock him instead. The moment he became conscious that he had committed a massive deed that couldn't be undone, he felt as if he were falling into a deep abyss. But on the other hand, the bold thought came to him, since things have already come to this, and an unknown courage also welled up. The restaurant boy respectfully served this customer with such a large appetite. He drank his tea with the utmost calmness and delay. After finishing it, he audaciously asked for more. He became increasingly bold. Calming his mind and putting full strength into his stomach, he said, "Thank you very much for feeding me so well when I was starving," he declared with guts. In those words, "I have no money, so do whatever you want," echoed the one audacious sentence. The audacious voice of a man with nothing left to lose echoes softly as our story comes to a close. We can only imagine the sheer weight of the world he carried on his weary shoulders throughout that grueling day. If your day felt a bit too heavy or the world a bit too cold, know that the night is here to offer you a quiet sanctuary. The struggles of the day have passed, and now it is time to feed your soul with rest. Let go of the lingering thoughts and allow the gentle embrace of the night to carry you away. Thank you for drifting into the dark with Slow Night Ancient Tales. Sleep well.